Okay, I have today with me Colonel Tony Shaffer to help me decipher what's going on. Colonel Shaffer, we've got a NATO proxy war against Putin. We've got a war between Israel and Hamas, potentially Hezbollah supporting Hamas out of Iran. Thank you so
Right.
much for being on the show to help us figure this stuff out.
Well, thank you for having me back, Stephen. It's always a great pleasure to be here and have our discussion. So, well, I think, Stephen, the Israelis were about to sign a significant agreement that would open up free trade with Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations. And oh my goodness, the Saudi Arabians were going to recognize Israel and its right to existence, and that was a huge issue. So I think that's why you've seen the Shia, the Iranians, at this time prompt, and I think we're going to come find evidence. I think it's already there, but they don't want to talk about it. That the Iranians not only encouraged the Hamas attack against Israel for purposes of harming Israel and them being sworn enemies. Hamas, one of its founding principles is the destruction of the Jewish state. So there you go, kind of in the name. So, but the reason they chose this time is because that agreement with the Saudis and Israelis was about to be signed, and it was about to be something that was going to change literally the relationship of states that have been at odds since 100 years ago, and it was very significant. I think that's why the timing of Hamas's attack is so critical, so important, and why they did it, and why they're going to sacrifice a lot, because they're going to suffer greatly because of the way they attacked the Jewish state. And I think the Iranians knew that, and the Iranians used them anyway. So I think this was all done by Iran. That's a long way getting to that conclusion. Sorry, but
No,
I had
that
to give context.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's an area that obviously the three major world religions all feel like they
Absolutely.
own a piece of the pie. Um, there's bad blood between Palestine and Israel.
Right.
They've patched that up several times, but now you have Hamas, which is basically like 30,000 people holding 2 million Palestinians hostage.
Right.
They're never able to get forward. It kind of reminds me. There's a philosopher by the name of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I
He's
know who he
pretty
is.
famous right now. In his books, 12 Rules for Life, he talks about if you throw a bunch of crabs into a bucket, you don't even have to put a lid on it. They'll never get out because anytime one of them tries to get out, the group pulls the other crab back down into the bottom of the bucket. And that's what I see as happening is Israel and Palestine. They used to have open borders, and people used to go back and forth for work opportunities, and there was capitalism there. But now you have this gang of like 30,000, and they're using these Palestinians as human shields in order to keep this holy war, this religious differences at the forefront of this relationship. But I was not aware that Saudi Arabia and Israel were on the verge of signing something major. Do you think, just from the news today, Hezbollah is saying, listen, Iran, Hezbollah, we consider Hamas our brothers. We
Right.
will do whatever it takes to help them to defeat Israel. Do you see Hezbollah, jumping into this fight?
It depends. I don't have a clear answer because I don't think they know if they're going to. This is why you've seen both the Eisenhower and well, the Eisenhower is being deployed now from Norfolk, and you already have the Gerald Ford carrier battle group there. The United States has, I think, used both back channels and official channels to state a widening of the conflict is something the United States would not support. Now, I don't know if people buy that because of who's in charge, Joe Biden. Obviously, Obama drew the red line regarding Syria, and he never enforced that red line, which resulted in all sorts of catastrophic nonsense after he didn't do that. So, in my judgment, it's very dangerous to bluff because, Stephen, if someone calls the U.S. bluff, it's going to be really bad. And I think we are bluffing. I'm just saying that the carrier battle groups moving there are bluffing. I don't know if the Biden folks will follow through because they've been so weak on Iran, and Iran is the one funding logistically supporting, and is basically Hezbollah is a client of the Iranian state. I would argue Hamas has been too. And just think about this for a second. The day of the attack, they used drones. I mean, not drones. They did use drones. As a matter of fact, they used drones to take out the sophisticated surveillance technology on the wall. Basically, they were able to use drones and snipers to basically blind the electronic surveillance systems that monitored the wall, secured the wall. Then they had a fleet, and I do mean a fleet of the kites, what do you call those? The paragliding things. It's like the beginning of Apocalypse Now on the helicopter scene, for goodness sake. I mean, you could see them coming. There's a video of that concert they hit. You can see them in the horizon. So they were very much able to map and understand the technology Israel was using. They overcame it. They were able to launch attacks, and then also they fired 5,000 rockets. These things aren't the size, you can't put them in your pocket, Stephen. These things are pretty big. So all of these things had to be mapped out intelligence-wise. You had to have an understanding. I would argue there was probably also some double agent operations where Hezbollah and Hamas worked with the Iranians to figure out who was the human assets of Mossad and fed false information to them. We've done the same thing. We've done it a number of times. So someone did that. Someone helped smuggle in all that technology. Someone helped give them technology to defeat other technology. And ultimately, I don't believe for a minute 30,000 people who were essentially cooped up in an area about the size of the Bronx plus Manhattan figured it all out on their own. And this took 2 years to do. So that tells me that there was a state sponsor. I think the Iranians are fully behind it. So this is a long way of answering your question. So yeah, I think this is why we're putting the carrier battle groups in, because there is a belief of a potential expansion of the war. Now, here's what's different. There's been secret relationships going on favorably between the Egyptians and Israelis for a long time. If it wasn't for the Israelis, Stephen, Egypt may have gone bankrupt during their time when al-Sisi was coming in. There's been secret support, which I'm blabbing about now, obviously, but there was secret support from the Israelis, economic and commercial support to help the Egyptian economy stay afloat during al-Sisi's early days. Nobody knew about it, but that helped solidify that relationship. So al-Sisi's not prone to jump in and attack the Israelis. Jordan has been on the path of supporting Israel for a long time. We have bases in Jordan. I don't know that they're disclosed, but we do. And then the Saudis obviously have come around too. So what you're talking about now is essentially a Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas group facing off against the Israelis. That's what the real order of battle is right now. And I think that's why the United States is saying to the Iranians, you don't want to do anything to expand this conflict. And that's where I think that's why we had the show of force. The question becomes, Stephen, do they buy it or not? And that's the question.
Yeah. Well, I noticed right away Qatar and the United Arabs of Emirates, they immediately were like, okay, we're not getting involved. We support Israel. We're going to go with what the United States recommends.
Correct.
Why on earth would a NATO partner, Turkey, President Erdogan said, beware, Arab nations, these aircraft carriers coming in are to massacre Arab nations. Why would a NATO partner put a message out like that? Or is Turkey so caught between Arabs and Russia and NATO that they don't know which face to show?
My judgment, and I actually talked to Mike Pompeo when he was director of CIA and Joe Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, about this. My judgment, Turkey should have been removed from NATO the moment they become an ally of ISIS. Basically, Stephen, ISIS would not have been anywhere near as successful as they were in undermining the government of Iraq and allowing them to go through and murder the Kurds if it wasn't for Erdogan, if it wasn't for his open door and allowing that to happen. And at the time, there was real questions, because one of the things I was working on back then was something called the Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization, an Arab NATO. And that, by the way, was one of the things which was the foundational concepts for the Abraham Accords. I'm just saying it's all related. because we gave that to Mike Flynn. Mike gave that to Trump back in 2016 when he was running. And then we continued to work that behind the scenes with senior members of the administration, to include me helping give talking points to Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia shortly after he took power. And the concept behind this Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization was simple. We have trained the majority of the military leadership in all those Arab nations for the past 30, 40 years. They're all trained by us. Al-Sisi himself is a war college graduate. We've invested greatly in the military. Let's use that for purposes of trying to create a condominium. That's my old boss, Dr. London's term, a condominium of agreement to allow these folks to work together. So that was the basis. So when we were doing that, I had to go see Mike Pompeo. As a matter of fact, the day after he was confirmed, I had to go over and sit down with Mike. He's getting ready to go to Turkey, he was going to Turkey. So he calls me in and he says, I'm aware of your Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization concept. I'm very intrigued by it. What should we do about Turkey? Yeah. I was like, well, this is the director of CIA, and I'm sitting there in his office like, well, Mike, they're not our friends. That I don't know what your view is going to be, but at this point, they have been acting against the interests of our allies in the region and NATO. So this is before they all got in bed with the Russians on a lot of issues, but it was going in that direction. So the answer is, at this point, Erdogan and Turkey is playing their own game. And I think sometimes that game is dangerous because I think it alienates both sides. In this case, I think it's a very dangerous thing because Erdogan's been warming up to Putin. I'm not a fan of either side. I'm just speaking bluntly about what I see. Erdogan has been warming up with Putin. They've got Russian-made air defense artillery systems going in and being used. I think he's been more friendly to the interests of Putin than he has to Ukraine. And I think that's one of the reasons he's actually being very vociferous in his commentary. Now, I can say with great assurance, no, we're not there to kill the Arabs. We're now kind of allied with them. They've been our ally for a long time. So that's just not true. But it doesn't mean that Erdogan won't have influence in making people think that. And I think that's why he's saying it. And it's a very dangerous thing. Turkey, by the way, Turkey has a huge role to play in this because they have the Bosphorus Straits, Black Sea, all these other access points that they control. So they have an oversized role and say in what happens in the war in Ukraine as well, because of trade, grain deals, things like that, and because they are a NATO member. So they have an outsized influence in all of this, and I think Erdogan's taking full advantage of that.
Yeah. Well, and I can see how he would have more loyalty potentially towards Russia because Russia might be able to help Turkey on an economic level. For example, Putin went to Erdogan and said, listen, allow us to put this pipeline through. Your dollar, your lira, has collapsed 80% since COVID. Allow us to rebuild Turkey. And so then it's like, okay, is Putin being genuine and he can flow Russian oil and get natural gas through Turkey and raise their economy? Or is he pulling a Hitler where Hitler says to Austria, give us all your guns and you'll never go hungry. And then 2 weeks later says, we have no food for you, but we've now captured you, right? So Erdogan has put himself in a peculiar situation that he's probably just every day trying to hold it all together.
I think it's accurate. And again, I think Erdogan is out for whatever he believes is best for Turkey. He's a strong man. He is another form of dictator. And he's been able to kind of weave his way back and forth between both West and East successfully. I mean, he's a smart politician. Don't get me wrong. He's been successful in doing that. But with that success comes stress. And it's got to be stressful. And yeah, this is another example of him saying something that really perturbs the West. It's like, yeah, we're not there to kill the Arabs. We may be there. And by the way, he's very close with the Iranians too, because the Iranians share the disdain for the Kurds. Remember, part of this is the Kurds fell off the radar. They made some huge political mistakes, just saying. Don't want to get into that necessarily right now, but the Kurds were going for their own Kurdish state. And Kurdistan would have made up of large elements of Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. So when it comes to the Kurds, Iran and Turkey are pretty much in the same sheet, and the Iraqis are not quite so much, because the Iraqis have kind of allowed Kurdistan, that area, to kind of become independent, semi-independent. But I'm just saying that there are some motivations there for Putin to be siding with. And Syria, I forgot to mention Syria. Putin would be, I mean, Syria and Erdogan, Syria, Iran, and Turkey are all kind of united on that point. So this may be kind of a back way of trying to continue to suppress the Kurds through this other way that they're going about trying to prompt a reaction from the West.
Yeah. Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin,
Yeah,
told Zelensky personally today, the United States still stands with you. We haven't forgotten you. We've been just a little bit distracted by this recent attack over in Israel. But do you think that there's a little bit of panic within Zelensky that Ukraine is about to be ignored and Putin will steamroll them?
well, there's two things, and I'm going to be blunt about both of them. Let's start with the technical first, because it's probably going to be the least controversial. We United States raided the military stocks, the contingency stocks that were located in Israel. I don't remember the exact month. It was a few months ago, where I think they sent Burns. I think they sent the CIA director over to say, "Hey, you got to give up some of this stuff." And I don't think the Israelis wanted to, but again, at the time, Stephen, the Israelis thought everything was just hunky dory, that there was no danger. Jake Sullivan said as much. Oh, the Middle East has not been as quiet as this for a lifetime, whatever it was. It was all stupid. And so I think Burns was able to convince them to give it up, because obviously to have it there, and these things are huge. I mean, we're talking about the size of Dayton, Ohio stocks of stuff. I mean, these things are huge. And so to raid that stock and give it to Zelensky and the Ukraine was a huge decision. Well, now they need those stocks because there's about to be a war. And I would argue, from people I've heard from, the reason that the offensive into Gaza has been delayed is because of the lack of available 155 and 105 ammunition. So that's become an issue. And yeah, if you got two allies who are at war and you got to choose one or the other, which one are you going to choose? So I think they're going to choose the Israelis. I think that's what the big issue is. I think there's the debate going on, and Zelensky knows this. Secondly, I got to tell you, Stephen, anytime you stand up and deliver, you start clapping for a guy that was the member of the SS, out killing people, killing Jews during World War II. Zelensky's moment of standing up clapping had to be noticed by the Jewish population of Israel. And so I think there's a real dissonance between the interests of the Israelis and Israeli people and Zelensky and Ukraine, based on some of the direction of things. And in many ways, remember, many Jews came out of Russia. They came out of Europe. And I don't think they dig the idea of being in bed, so to speak, very metaphorically, just saying, with any state that supports or has elements of its people to support the Nazi concepts or honor those sort of things in any way. So those are the two issues I see right now that are kind of building behind the scenes. And I don't see the Israelis giving any quarter to Zelensky. I think they're going to want everything for themselves, and they're not going to bat an eyelash about it. And so that's going to put the Biden administration in a very difficult position.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, Zelensky comes from a Jewish lineage. On the other hand, he and his country are bullied by Nazis.
That's correct.
And if a little guy like me in Utah doing a little bit of research had his eyes open to how many Nazis were in Ukraine, you don't think Israel and the Mossad are well aware of that? I'm sure they were very reluctant to hand over that ammunition, and now they're probably trying to claw it back or not send what they have.
Yes.
And I'm sure Zelensky is like, wait a minute, the media blackout on Ukraine is noticeable. Is there going to be a blackout on funding? Because I can tell you right now, there's a lot more people in Congress that support Israel than Ukraine. And with over 50% of the American population saying no more new money from US taxpayers, I think Ukraine may need to start warming up their peace talk pen, because I think this thing's going to have to wrap up.
So, yeah, let me be clear on. There's a significant difference in the fabric of the relationship with the Israelis and Ukraine. I mean, I get full disclosure. You know, my old boss, Dr. London, the London Center is named after a Jewish man named Herb London. It is what it is. You know, I worked for him. He's Jewish. The Jewish elements of our society are deeply rooted. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm just saying it as an observation. I'm not saying that they control things. There's not conspiracy. No, they're fully integrated. They're like any other group who's successful. You know, you have folks from different lineages who have a record of performance based on their family values. That's it. It is what it is. And you know, Herb's family came from he was kind of a liberal in the beginning of his days. You know, he was kind of a neocon. He grew out of that, thank God, and became someone who recognizes the importance of freedom in the Constitution. Much like I think you know, Tulsi Gabbard went through her metamorphosis from kind of being a liberal to someone who's not a liberal, who's a free thinker. So I see people like that all the time. And so my belief is that because the relationship is so deep with the Israelis, the preference is going to go to Israel. And even a lot of those reluctant Republicans to support Ukraine have no reluctance to support the Jewish state.
Yeah.
So I think the writing's on the wall.
Yeah. Okay. Two more questions.
Yeah.
You were heavily involved with the group that discovered the terrorist cells within the United States that led to 9/11.
Yeah.
The Clinton administration basically said, we don't want to touch it. If they're here in the country, you can leave it to George Bush. George Bush and Cheney come in, they're overwhelmed, taking over a presidency. It gets ignored. Boom, 9/11 happens, right?
Yeah.
That's
pretty accurate.
Do you think with removing Trump's flight restrictions from these different Middle East countries that dislike us and this open border, that there could be sleeper cells planning and scheming against the United States right here on native soil?
Oh, I think so. And I'm not saying this to be provocative or stroke fear. I do. So my second book, Stephen, I'm going to give you right The Last Line. The Last Line is a book that actually, the last line is the border. That's what the book's about. It's about the Southwest border. And it's about terrorist organizations, how they would go about using an open border, using open access to airports. We talk about airports in there to do the very thing you're talking about. So yes, I think it's very possible, because we wrote a book 10 years ago that said this could happen. And here we are. So there are restrictions and screening processes for a reason. I think those things are reasonable. People still pass those screening processes if they're, you know, found to have nothing in their background. But I do believe that we are obligated, we, the U.S. government, I'm speaking in the big we, the United States government and officials like myself are obligated to do the best they can to protect the American people from threats, period, no matter where those threats are. And that means being diligent and detailed in your review of individuals coming to the United States. It's not that hard. Nobody has the right to be here except Americans. And if you want to come here and be American, then wonderful. If you want to come visit, wonderful. But you've got to behave in such a way to not disrupt or destroy Americans. I think it's a reasonable thing don't you think, Stephen? That's a reasonable thing to ask for. And so that's the obligation. So Trump did that. And I remember that controversy about, oh, he hates Muslims. No, it was never a Muslim ban. It was a ban against certain countries which had radical elements where you could not, in any great detail, do a review of individuals regarding background. That's it. That's what it was. It's what it is. And those restrictions being removed do increase the danger. Also, the Southwest border. You know, and I've done several interviews. They're on my social media. You know, if there's any doubt of the need of a Second Amendment, the Hamas attack on those kibbutzes proved it right there. You can never have enough police or army available at any given time in a gun-free zone that can come rescue people. Out of the 25 kibbutzes which were destroyed, 24 out of the 25 attacked, 24 were destroyed. One was not. The one that was not was with a guy that had a gun that could fight back. So I'm just saying.
This is probably why Israel immediately handed out 10,000
That's
weapons to
right.
their citizens.
You can see nicely dressed ladies with M16s on their shoulder, and that's a good look for me. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that that we believe. I mean, again, people can read the last line. It's still available on Amazon and all that. And that was the scenario we outlined. It's like we saw this coming. And I'm just saying that, my job is to try to figure things out. I'm not a soothsayer. I'm not a gypsy. I don't go out and have a crystal ball, but I'm an intelligence officer and I see trends. I see things that sometimes are creeping up on us 10, 20, 30 years out. And in this case, we saw the direction of things regarding the policies which were in place regarding the Southwest border, regarding what Trump tried to fix. And it's not opening all those spigots of bad guys back up is just kind of opening, kind of egging on an attack, which I think is inevitable. But remember, look what happened. Trump comes to power. All these so-called lone wolf attacks stop because they weren't lone wolf. They were being orchestrated by ISIS in a very subdued way through social media and other things. And lo and behold, Trump comes to power. They stop, right? Right, Stephen? Right? When's the last time we had a lone wolf attack by an ISIS sympathizer? It's been years. Even now, there's been years because they went after them so vigorously. I'm just saying that there's ways of stopping this stuff. It takes the political will to do it. 9/11, the Able Danger, the operation mentioned, we could have stopped the 9/11 attacks, but they didn't have the political will to let us do what was necessary to stop those guys. That's the sad truth.
Yeah. Okay, final thing, and I'll let you go. I appreciate you coming on.
Sure.
Former President George W. Bush, who rarely makes public comments anymore, he said he is worried for what is going to happen between Palestine and Israel because of Hamas, that it will be bloody and ugly. But he said, as someone who was a world leader, you cannot negotiate with cold-blooded killers. Do you agree with that? That Israel is going to have to do something?
Yeah,
Or
I do.
okay,
The metaphor I've been using is, what if West Virginia decided they were just going to start shooting missiles into Virginia? Virginia wouldn't stand for that. Virginia would do something. Virginia would basically say, with or without the federal government, we're going into West Virginia and we're going to stop this. So this has been going on since 2007. I'm not saying the Israelis are 100% right. I'm saying that the Israelis have the right to exist, and you can't be targeting civilians. And the Hamas attack, and it's funny, I get into these knuckleheads on social media. Oh, those baby murder pictures were manipulated. Okay, maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that Hamas did murder people in their homes. This is like the 9/11 truthers. I was just going back and forth. Like the 9/11 truthers went off on these tangents about microthermite and all these other things. Like there's big policy issues which need to be resolved. Don't worry about these little things. Like I don't really care. I care about the fact that the policy is such that Hamas has been allowed to exist and prosper in such a way to establish itself as a military force of terror. It is. They use it. So I don't think we would allow Mexico or West Virginia to start lobbing rockets across the border, from West Virginia to Virginia, or from Mexico into Texas or New Zealand. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting my A's mixed up. Just call me Joe Biden, Arizona. So I think that's the issue, and they do have that right to go in there. Now the question becomes the cost. What will be the cost? What will be the cost to the Palestinians, the Hamas folks? As you mentioned, Stephen, out of about 2.3 million, about 30,000 are said to be Hamas. That's a pretty small percentage, and you're going to punish a lot of people to get to them. Yeah, it is what it is. And then the long-term stability. What does that mean? Does that mean that they actually physically take the space back? Do they hold and occupy the Gaza Strip like they did before? Do they push them all into Egypt, which I don't think the Egyptians want, just saying, and take the terrain back and make it Israeli? I don't know. But they're not going to allow Hamas to continue to fire these rockets into the Israeli state. It's just not going to be in the cards. So I don't know what that means yet, to be honest with you.
Wow. I heard these homemade rockets were the United Nations had sent over a bunch of piping in order to fix their water infrastructure. And Hamas stole that from the Palestinian government in
Yeah.
order to be secretly making these rockets. So the very water pipes that, like, oh, poor Palestine, free Palestine, they tried to, but
Yeah.
these 30,000, this like just over 1%, is holding the other 99% hostage with their bad behavior. And it's sad what is most likely going to transpire over the next week or so.
I agree. And so, yeah, I think when they signed the Oslo II Accords back in 95, there on the White House lawn, the belief was you basically had a two-state solution. You really did. I mean, what's a two-state solution? It was. And the belief, I believe, for those who had their heart in the right place is that, yeah, they'll have two states and both will economically prosper to the point of where the border just comes down. It's like everything is so prosperous. Yeah, you got to, it's like the line between, I don't know, North Dakota and South Dakota. Yeah, there's a border there, but nobody cares. That was what the belief was for those who wanted it to be good. Well, Hamas had other ideas. When they came to power in 2007, and part of their basic foundational concept is we're going to kill the Jews and we're going to eradicate them. It just kind of goes against that concept. And I think that's where a lot of things have gone off the rails and have not gone back on the rails. And yeah, I'm sorry to George Bush, his point. If I have a neighbor who says he's going to kill me, I got to take that at face value and accept it and act on that.
Yeah. Well, I know Jared Kushner said that the secret to those miraculous Abraham Accords, which we're now seeing in effect now, was let's focus on making the future better for everybody through
That's
trade,
right.
and not focus on religion, not focus on the past, focus on the future. And hopefully, that will be something that comes out down the road. But Colonel Shaffer, thank you so much for coming on today's show. I really appreciate your insight.